The summer heat still lingered in Fairfield, Ohio, on the night of August 13, 2011. Inside a small apartment complex on Dorshire Drive, 21-year-old Katelyn Markham was just days away from her birthday, putting the finishing touches on her graphic design portfolio. The clock was ticking toward midnight, and in less than 24 hours she would vanish without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt her community for over a decade. Her apartment showed no signs of struggle. Keys still on the counter, wallet untouched. Her beloved dog pacing anxiously by the door. Her car remained parked outside, exactly where she had left it. It was as if Katelyn had simply evaporated into the warm summer air, leaving behind a life frozen in time. Wedding magazines scattered on her coffee table, a half-finished art project on her desk, and text messages to her fiancé John Carter that would never be answered. "Something's wrong," John would later tell the 911 dispatcher on August 14th, his voice carrying an edge that investigators would spend years analyzing. She wouldn't just disappear. She wouldn't just leave her dog like this. The responding officer noted something unusual that evening. The front door had been unlocked, a detail that seemed innocuous at first but would later take on a more sinister significance. For a young woman who lived alone, an unlocked door raised the first of many red flags in what would become one of Ohio's most perplexing missing persons cases. In the days that followed, Fairfield would witness an unprecedented community response. Over 100 volunteers combed through woods, searched abandoned buildings, and plastered missing person posters across 3 counties. Local news crews captured the image of John Carter, Katelyn's fiancé of 1 year, his voice breaking as he addressed the cameras. "Please, if anyone knows anything, help us bring her home." But as summer faded into fall, and fall gave way to winter, Katelyn remained missing. The investigation would uncover layers of secrets, shattered alibis, and a web of relationships that would eventually lead to a shocking conclusion. One that would leave an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and justice. What happened to Katelyn Markham in those crucial hours between midnight and dawn? The answer would take 12 years to emerge, and when it did, it would shake the foundations of Fairfield's justice system and leave an indelible mark on everyone involved in the case. Born on August 16, 1989, Katelyn Markham embodied the creative spirit of her hometown, Fairfield, Ohio. Those who knew her described a young woman whose artistic talent was matched only by her ability to light up any room she entered. Her father, Dave Markham, would later tell investigators Katelyn had this gift. She could make friends with anyone, even the shyest kid on the playground. By the summer of 2011, Katelyn was just weeks away from completing her graphic design degree at the Art Institute of Ohio, Cincinnati. Her portfolio showcased a promising future: vibrant digital designs, thoughtful layouts, and the kind of raw creativity that professors said could take her far in the industry. She wasn't just talented, her academic advisor would later testify. She had vision. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, cracks had begun to appear. In the months leading up to her disappearance, close friends noticed subtle changes in Katelyn's behavior. Sarah Mitchell, her best friend since high school, later revealed to detectives she started getting quieter, more withdrawn. When I asked about the wedding plans, she'd changed the subject. Her relationship with John Carter had begun 6 years earlier, when they were both teenagers. High school sweethearts who seemed destined for a fairy tale ending, they got engaged in 2010. The couple had dreams of starting fresh in Colorado after Katelyn's graduation. They'd even started looking at apartments in Denver. John and Katelyn appeared perfect together, recalled neighbor Lisa Thompson. But looking back, there were signs we all missed. Thompson would later describe hearing occasional arguments from Katelyn's apartment, though at the time she'd dismissed them as normal couple disagreements. Friends later revealed to investigators that Katelyn had confided in them about troubling changes in John's behavior. He had reportedly become more controlling, questioning her about male classmates and growing increasingly agitated about her late-night study sessions at the art studio. One friend who requested anonymity told police, "She mentioned thinking about breaking off the engagement, but she was scared of how he might react. Work colleagues at the bridal shop where Katelyn held a part-time job remembered her as unfailingly reliable. She never missed a shift without calling. Her manager, Karen Reynolds, stated, "That's why that Sunday morning was so strange. It wasn't like her at all." The last project in Katelyn's portfolio, found on her laptop after her disappearance, was hauntingly prophetic. A series of butterfly designs symbolizing transformation and freedom. Her professor would later note that it was some of her best work, showing an artist on the cusp of finding her true voice. On her bedroom wall hung a calendar marked with 2 significant dates: August 16th, her upcoming 22nd birthday, and December 15th, her graduation day. She would never celebrate either milestone. Saturday, August 13th, 2011, began like any other summer day in Fairfield. The timestamp on Katelyn's last Instagram post showed 7:30 p.m. A photo of her art project captioned, "Almost finished. Necker graduation, each hot can't wait to move." It would be the last public trace of her life. That evening, John Carter and their mutual friend Michael Strauss arrived at Katelyn's apartment around 8 p.m. Security footage from the apartment complex's parking lot captured their arrival. According to Carter's initial statement to police, they were just hanging out, watching TV while Katelyn worked on her laptop, finishing some project. Nothing seemed out of ordinary, he insisted. Michael Strauss left the apartment at 11:22 p.m. He would later tell investigators that while Katelyn seemed quieter than usual, perhaps stressed about deadlines, there was nothing that raised any immediate concerns. The next few hours would become the focus of intense scrutiny by investigators. Carter claimed he left shortly after Strauss around 11:30 p.m. to attend a party with other friends. Cell phone records revealed what would be their final exchange. At 11:36 p.m., Katelyn texted John asking him to let her know when he arrived. He responded at 11:45 p.m. confirming he'd reached the party. At 11:48 p.m., Katelyn sent him a photo of her artwork. His last message came at 12:03 a.m., asking if she was getting tired. At 12:06 a.m., Katelyn's phone went dark. It would never activate again. In what would later become crucial testimony, 2 teenagers, Sarah Jensen and Kyle Roberts, were sneaking out for their own late-night adventure when they witnessed something unusual. Around 2 a.m., they saw 2 cars pull up to John's mother's house with their headlights off. They recognized one as John's car, which struck them as odd since he was supposedly at a party across town. The next morning brought the first signs that something was terribly wrong. Katelyn didn't show up for her shift at the bridal shop. Her manager, Karen Reynolds, called her cell phone repeatedly at 11:00 a.m., but each time it went straight to voicemail, something that had never happened before. The day stretched into evening before John Carter finally made the call to 911 at 7:12 p.m. The conversation with the dispatcher would later be scrutinized by investigators for its seemingly rehearsed quality. Carter reported his fiancée missing, explaining that while her car was still there and her dog was in the apartment, Katelyn herself had vanished. When asked if this was unusual behavior, his voice cracked as he insisted she would never just leave like this. Officer James Martinez's arrival at the apartment at 7:30 p.m. marked the beginning of the official investigation. The scene he encountered would later haunt him. The front door was unlocked with no signs of forced entry. Katelyn's wallet sat on the kitchen counter, still containing $97. Her car keys hung by the door, her laptop lay closed on the coffee table, and her unfed dog paced anxiously. Everything looked perfectly in place. Too perfect, as Martinez would later testify, as if meticulously arranged for investigators to find. As night fell, Katelyn's father arrived at the apartment, his face etched with worry. Standing before the growing crowd of reporters, he spoke words that would prove heartbreakingly prophetic. "Something terrible has happened to my daughter. I can feel it." He couldn't have known then how right he was or that the truth would take 12 long years to emerge. The first 48 hours of Katelyn's disappearance transformed the quiet streets of Fairfield into a hub of frantic activity. By Monday morning, August 15th, more than 100 volunteers had gathered at the police command center, ready to begin the search. Among them stood John Carter, appearing distraught and eager to help, even as detectives began noticing the first of many inconsistencies in his story. Detective Sarah Morgan, the lead investigator assigned to the case, immediately picked up on subtle details that didn't align. During his initial interview, Carter's demeanor shifted noticeably when questioned about specific times and locations. More striking were the fresh scratches on his neck, which he attributed to a hasty morning shave. People react differently to stress, Morgan noted in her preliminary report, but something about his responses felt rehearsed. The investigation quickly uncovered troubling patterns in the digital evidence. While Carter claimed he'd texted Katelyn a good morning message on Sunday as usual, phone records showed no such message existed. More concerning were the deleted text messages from Saturday night, a gap in their conversation that Carter couldn't explain. When pressed about the missing texts, he stammered, "I don't remember deleting anything. Maybe the phone did it automatically?" Meanwhile, the search effort expanded across 3 counties. Helicopters swept low over wooded areas while volunteers combed through every abandoned building, empty lot, and drainage ditch within a 5-mile radius of Katelyn's apartment. Local news crews captured the intensity of the search, with Carter appearing regularly on camera, his voice breaking as he pleaded for information about his fiancée's whereabouts. But behind the scenes, investigators were piecing together a very different picture. Neighbors from Katelyn's apartment complex came forward with accounts of an argument they'd heard late Saturday night. One resident, Eleanor Martinez, reported hearing what sounded like banging and someone repeatedly saying "no" in a quiet voice around midnight. This timeline directly contradicted Carter's claim that he'd left for the party by 11:30 p.m. The case took another turn when detectives interviewed the teenagers who'd spotted the cars at Carter's mother's house. Their account of seeing him return home at 2 a.m. with another vehicle, lights off, moving quietly, shattered his party alibi. When confronted with this information, Carter's explanation shifted. "I might have stopped home to grab something," he said, "but I don't remember another car." Perhaps most disturbing was what investigators found when they began interviewing Katelyn's close friends. Several came forward with stories of concerning behavior in the months leading up to her disappearance. One friend, Rachel Stevens, revealed that Katelyn had confided in her about John's increasing possessiveness and volatile temper. "She told me she was thinking about calling off the engagement," Stevens told detectives, "but she was afraid of how he'd react." The investigation also revealed that Carter's laptop activity didn't match his story. While he claimed to have been watching movies at home after the party, forensic analysis showed only browser tabs being opened. No actual video playback was detected. It was as if someone had deliberately created a digital alibi without actually using the computer. As the first week drew to a close, Detective Morgan faced a troubling reality. Their prime suspect had been right in front of them all along, participating in searches, giving interviews, and playing the role of the grieving fiancé, but proving it would take more than circumstantial evidence and inconsistent statements. Like many cases that would later haunt investigators, the most obvious suspect was often the hardest to prosecute. By Friday, August 19th, the search operation had covered over 1,000 acres without finding a single trace of Katelyn. Her father, Dave Markham, stood before reporters, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry. "Someone knows something," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious pain. "Please, if you know anything about what happened to my daughter, come forward." He couldn't have known then that the truth would remain hidden for over a decade, buried beneath layers of lies and carefully constructed alibis. April the 10th, 2013, dawned cold and gray in Cedar Grove, Indiana. Andy Mitchell, a local scrap metal collector, was searching through a wooded area near Big Cedar Creek when he noticed something unusual: a black garbage bag partially hidden beneath scattered leaves. What he discovered inside would finally break open the case that had haunted Ohio for nearly 2 years. Inside the bag, Mitchell found human remains. His hands trembling, he immediately called 911. "I think I found something you need to see," he told the dispatcher, his voice barely steady. "Something that shouldn't be here." Indiana State Police arrived within minutes, quickly cordoning off what would become one of the most significant crime scenes in the investigation. The location itself spoke volumes to investigators. Cedar Grove sat just 30 minutes from Fairfield, along a route that John Carter frequently traveled to visit his father's farm. The remains had been discarded near a pile of trash, suggesting the killer hadn't even attempted to bury them, a detail that struck investigators as both brazen and personal. Forensic analysis confirmed what many had feared. The remains were those of Katelyn Markham. The discovery of a stab wound on one of her arm bones provided the first concrete evidence of foul play, though the full extent of her injuries proved impossible to determine due to decomposition. Dr. Elizabeth Curtis, the forensic anthropologist who examined the remains, noted signs of dismemberment. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, she would later testify. This required planning and determination. The location of Katelyn's remains triggered a fresh wave of investigation. Detective Morgan's team began mapping John Carter's movements in the days following Katelyn's disappearance. Cell phone tower data showed his phone pinging near Cedar Grove multiple times that August, though he had never mentioned traveling to Indiana during initial interviews. The black garbage bags containing Katelyn's remains yielded another crucial piece of evidence. They matched a distinct type sold at only one local store, the same store where security footage showed John Carter making a purchase late on August 13, 2011. When confronted with this information, Carter claimed he'd bought the bags for household use, but could not produce any witnesses to verify this claim. Inside Katelyn's remains, forensics teams found traces of a unique pollen specific to a type of flower that grew only in one location in the area, directly behind John Carter's mother's house. This microscopic evidence placed Katelyn's body at that location before it reached its final resting place in Cedar Grove. The discovery devastated Katelyn's family, but also brought a grim sort of relief. Dave Markham, speaking to reporters outside the coroner's office, struggled to maintain composure. "We finally know where she is," he said, his voice breaking. "But now we need to know who did this to her and why." He couldn't have known that even with these new revelations, it would take another decade before justice would finally catch up with his daughter's killer. John Carter's reaction to the discovery raised more red flags. While appearing appropriately distraught in public, investigators noted his primary concern seemed to be how the media was portraying him. During one interview, he spent more time complaining about news coverage than discussing Katelyn. Dady Morgan's notes from that interview read, "Subject shows more animation discussing his own image than his deceased fiancée." As spring turned to summer in 2013, the investigation entered a new phase. They had a crime scene, forensic evidence, and a growing list of inconsistencies in their prime suspect's story. What they still lacked was the one piece of evidence that would tie it all together: a smoking gun that would turn circumstantial evidence into proof beyond reasonable doubt. The years following the discovery of Katelyn's remains marked a period of frustrating near misses for investigators. While evidence pointed toward John Carter, prosecutors feared they lacked the concrete proof needed for a conviction. But in 2023, a series of unexpected developments would finally break the case wide open. The first breakthrough came from Carter's own home. During a renewed search of his mother's house, where he had lived in 2011, investigators discovered something chilling in his old bedroom, a collection of handwritten poems that read more like confessions. One particularly disturbing entry contained the lines, "Deep down, I love her. You have to kill her, but I love her. She has to die." When confronted with these writings, Carter claimed they were merely creative exercises, but forensics dated the paper and ink to the summer of 2011. More damning evidence emerged when detectives re-interviewed Carter's friend Jonathan, who had been with him the night Katelyn vanished. After 12 years of silence, Jonathan finally cracked under intensive questioning. He revealed that Carter had called him in a panic around 1 a.m. that night, asking for help moving something heavy. Jonathan admitted to meeting Carter at his mother's house, but claimed he left when he realized what might have happened. His testimony placed Carter with Katelyn's body at the exact time the teenage witnesses had reported seeing two cars. The investigation also uncovered disturbing patterns in Carter's subsequent relationships. His current wife had filed several domestic incident reports describing episodes of rage and controlling behavior. Video footage from their home security system captured Carter in the midst of violent outbursts, revealing a side of him that starkly contrasted with the grieving fiancé persona he had maintained for years. Perhaps the most shocking revelation came from Carter's own cell phone. While the original phone from 2011 was long gone, detectives discovered cloud backups containing deleted photos from the night of Katelyn's disappearance. Among them was an image of Katelyn's apartment taken after midnight, when Carter claimed he was at a party across town. The metadata told a story he couldn't explain away. March 2023 brought the moment Katelyn's family had waited 12 years to see. Detective Morgan, now nearing retirement, had the satisfaction of placing handcuffs on John Carter. As she read him his rights, she noted that his primary concern wasn't the charges. It was whether the media had been notified. In that moment, Morgan would later write in her report, "I saw the mask finally slip completely." The arrest sent shockwaves through Fairfield. People who had stood beside Carter during searches, who had comforted him during vigils, now grappled with the betrayal. One search volunteer, Mary Thompson, told reporters through tears, "We were looking for her with her killer. He watched us search while knowing exactly where she was." But the most heart-wrenching moment came during Carter's arraignment. Dave Markham, who had spent 12 years fighting for justice, sat silently in the courtroom as prosecutors detailed how his daughter's fiancé had strangled her during an argument, then methodically disposed of her body. "The hardest part," Dave would later say, "wasn't just losing Katelyn. It was knowing that the man who killed her hugged me at her memorial service." The investigation had uncovered the truth, but the path to justice would prove more complicated than anyone expected. As prosecutors prepared their case, they faced a challenging reality. Much of their evidence, though compelling, remained circumstantial. The question wasn't just whether Carter had killed Katelyn, it was whether they could prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. June 2024 brought a development that would shake the community's faith in the justice system. Despite the mountain of circumstantial evidence, prosecutors faced a difficult decision. Without direct physical evidence linking Carter to the murder, they worried about securing a conviction at trial. This led to a controversial plea deal that would haunt Fairfield for years to come. John Carter stood before Judge Michael Anderson on a sweltering summer morning, his face expressionless as he pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. The reduction from murder charges meant he would face a maximum of just 3 years in prison. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers as the terms were read. Dave Markham, given the opportunity to address his daughter's killer, delivered a statement that brought even hardened court officers to tears. "For 12 years, you watched me search for my daughter. For 12 years, you sat across from me at dinner, knowing what you had done. You didn't just kill Katelyn, you tortured our entire family with your silence." The plea deal revealed disturbing details through Carter's required admission of guilt, though he carefully avoided sharing specifics about the murder itself. He acknowledged being in Katelyn's apartment that night, admitted to an altercation that got out of hand, and confirmed disposing of her body in Indiana. But the full truth of what happened in those final moments remained locked away with him. Detective Morgan, watching from the gallery, later described the feeling of helplessness. "We knew he did it. He knew we knew. But knowing and proving are two different things in our justice system." The prosecution's dilemma had been clear: risk a trial with circumstantial evidence and possibly see Carter walk free, or secure a conviction with a lesser sentence. The community's reaction was immediate and fierce. Protests erupted outside the courthouse. Local news channels captured footage of demonstrators holding signs reading, "3 years for a life," and "Justice for Katelyn." Social media exploded with outrage as people struggled to understand how 12 years of investigation could end with such a light sentence. Carter's cellmate would later come forward with claims that Carter had confessed to more details during late-night conversations. According to the inmate, Carter described strangling Katelyn during an argument about their relationship, claiming, "She said she was going to leave me." However, these jailhouse confessions came too late to impact the case. Meanwhile, investigations into potential accomplices continued. Carter's friend Jonathan faced perjury charges for his years of false statements, though prosecutors ultimately dropped these charges due to lack of evidence. The mystery of the second car seen that night remained unsolved, another piece of the puzzle that might never fall into place. July 19, 2024, marked Carter's final court appearance for sentencing. Judge Anderson, bound by the plea agreement's terms, had no choice but to impose the 3-year sentence. His frustration was evident as he addressed Carter. The tragedy here is not just the loss of a young woman's life, but the mockery this sentence makes of justice. Unfortunately, the law sometimes fails to provide the punishment that true justice demands. As Carter was led away in handcuffs, Katelyn's father made one final statement to the press. 3 years for my daughter's life. He'll be out before he turns 40, with most of his life ahead of him. Meanwhile, we serve a life sentence without Katelyn. Where's the justice in that? The autumn of 2024 brought a strange quiet to Fairfield, Ohio. John Carter began serving his 3-year sentence at the Lebanon Correctional Institution, while the community grappled with the unsettling aftermath of a case that had haunted them for over a decade. Detective Morgan, in her final press conference before retirement, addressed the lingering questions that continued to trouble investigators. "We know there's more to this story," she stated, her voice heavy with the weight of unfinished business. "Someone else knows what happened that night. The second car, the missing hours, the way her body was moved. These pieces suggest Carter didn't act alone. The investigation into possible accomplices remained active, focusing particularly on the connection between Carter, his friend Jonathan, and Michael Strauss, the man later convicted of killing another young woman in a nearby town. The trio's appearance together in photographs from a music festival took on new significance as investigators explored the possibility of a darker, shared history. Carter's new life behind bars brought unexpected developments. Fellow inmates reported his strange behavior, moments of apparent remorse followed by calculated attempts to manipulate his story. One corrections officer noted in his report, inmate Carter spends hours writing in his journal, but tears out and destroys certain pages. When asked about Katelyn, he alternates between claiming total memory loss and hinting at details only the killer would know. Meanwhile, the case sparked changes in how local law enforcement handled missing persons investigations. The Fairfield Police Department implemented new protocols dubbed Katelyn's Guidelines, requiring immediate digital evidence collection and faster escalation of suspicious disappearances. "Her case taught us that the first 48 hours are crucial," explained Police Chief Robert Martinez. "We can't afford to wait when someone vanishes under suspicious circumstances." Katelyn's father channeled his grief into action, establishing the Katelyn Markham Justice Foundation. The organization works to support families of missing persons and advocates for stronger domestic violence laws. "If we can prevent even one family from going through what we did," Dave Markham said during the foundation's launch, "then some good will have come from this tragedy." The art community at the Art Institute of Ohio Cincinnati created a permanent memorial, a gallery featuring Katelyn's final works, including the prophetic butterfly designs found on her laptop. Her professor reflected, "These pieces show not just talent, but a soul on the verge of breaking free. That makes them all the more heartbreaking. But perhaps the most profound impact remained invisible. The way the case changed how people in Fairfield viewed their neighbors, their relationships, and the facade of small-town safety. As one resident put it, "We learned that monsters don't look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the boy next door, the grieving fiancé, the friend searching alongside you. When Carter becomes eligible for release in 2027, he'll walk free before his 40th birthday. The butterfly designs that Katelyn created will have outlived her by 16 years. Her father keeps a digital frame in his living room, cycling through photos of his daughter. The hardest part, he says, isn't the length of his sentence. It's knowing that we'll never know everything that happened that night. Some truths died with Katelyn. The case files remain open. Somewhere in Fairfield, someone still holds secrets about that August night. And while John Carter sits in his cell, the echoes of his crimes continue to ripple through the community, reminding everyone that justice, like truth, sometimes comes in imperfect measures.